and it's actually my first season here at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. I'm interning with the Division of Interpretation, which is essentially the educational component of being a park ranger. So I just wanted to find out where everyone else was from. We usually have a lot of diversity just at the General Sherman tree alone. So anyone from East Coast, Southern California, Northern California? A couple of hands. Where's everyone from?
Norway.
Norway.
Holland.
A lot of competition right there. Very good. One more? Chicago. Very good. Is it humid there right now?
That's why we're here.
Yeah. So we have people here from Chicago, from Norway, halfway across the world here to see the General Sherman tree. But if we get started, the General Sherman tree actually isn't the tallest tree in the world. The tallest trees in the world are actually the coastal redwoods. They grow on the coasts of California, Oregon, and then up to Washington as well. They're actually cousins of the giant sequoias, and they can actually grow to about 400 feet tall. Sequoias usually top off at about, I think 313 is the record, 313 feet. So that's still pretty tall. General Sherman is 275 feet tall. Giant sequoias and General Sherman in general also is not the widest tree in the world. Does anyone know where this is?
Mexico.
This is the Tule tree in Oaxaca, Mexico. It's actually been disputed that it's 4 trees fused together, but regardless, it takes about 27 school children to circle all the way around holding hands. So that's the widest tree on Earth right now. And finally, it's not the oldest tree. Those go to the bristlecone pines. They grow on the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada, and they're known to grow till about 5,000 years old. And they grow in the White Mountains. So you can definitely visit that. It's about area of Lone Pine, up to 395 on the eastern side. So General Sherman is the largest tree in the world by volume. Sound like something fell. Largest tree in the world by volume. So I already said he's 275 feet tall. The circumference at the base of the tree is 103 feet. And the diameter is 36.5 feet. And if you look up, do you see that big branch? It's just a branch. It's 7.3 feet in diameter. So that's pretty much larger than every other tree on the east coast of the United States. So to kind of draw a comparison for that, imagine a tree that's growing 50 feet tall and is a foot wide in diameter. That's how much bark a General Sherman and a giant sequoia produce on average within one single year. 50 feet tall, 1 foot in diameter. Alright? So just to kind of understand the magnitude of the growth of this organism, this tree alone is very special because this tiny little seedling is able to transcend all of its rivals from the time that it was a tiny little seed to the giant mammoth that it is today. So I wanted to pass around some giant sequoia seeds. I'd really like to have them back, but I'll start on this end over here. So as I pass those around, giant sequoia seeds are about 1/4 of an inch in length, if that, and it's comparable to about 3 sheets of paper. And the DNA of the giant sequoias is just on that tiny little dark strip down the center of the seed. And the rest of it is kind of just used for it to float its way down into the soil. Now, there are 2 ways for giant sequoias to regenerate themselves, and they can't do it alone. The first way is with the chicory. It's a tiny little tree squirrel that lives in these parks. And the chicory's favorite treat is, what is this? This is a giant sequoia cone. This one is a little bit smaller than the average giant sequoia cone, but imagine an egg shape, or a chicken egg. Alright? After chicory is done with it, looks like that. And chicories will eat away at the entire cone, but they're not interested in the seeds that I'm passing around. Those have absolutely no nutritional value for the chicories. or Douglas squirrels. So basically what they'll let happen is, after they're done, they just let it fall to the ground and the seeds will scatter that way. So they're aiding the giant sequoias in seed dispersal because of their disinterest in the seeds, essentially. Now there's a quote I like to read. It's from a book called Big Trees, and it was written by Walter Fry and John White, who were both major explorers in the park in the 1800s and 1900s. And it goes like this. From what did it spring? What mighty seed brought forth this mammoth of the vegetable kingdom? So now you kind of have an idea of how hard it is for these tiny little seeds that I'm passing around to actually get going. Does anyone know the number 2 way that giant sequoias regenerate themselves?
Fire? With fire or?
I heard a couple of people say fire. That's right. So what we're trying to do in the parks is we're basically trying to mimic routines of years past. So we actually do what are called prescribed fires here in the park, and we'll typically burn about 2 acres at a time. So that by the time we're done doing a certain area, 30 years have passed, which is the normal cycle of a fire for giant sequoias under natural circumstances. And what happens when giant sequoias experience fires is the smoke builds up into the canopy and branches of the trees. And what happens is these cones that I showed you, they're able to actually open up. And as they're opening up, they can release their seeds. And each one of these cones holds about 200 giant sequoia seeds. All right? And then while that's happening, all of this dust and debris that we call is essentially getting burned away by the smoldering flames just down below. And it doesn't have to be large, but it does clear out very significant portions of the forest floor. And that actually allows the seeds to fall into fertile ash soil once they are released. And then on General Sherman, you can see these tiny little triangles. They're definitely more prominent on other trees, on other giant sequoias, just in this general area alone. But they're what are called fire scars. And fire scars are basically because the trees are so fire resistant. Are you all set with that? Thank you so much. I don't think they saw it. Oh, do you guys want to take a look? Yeah, thank you. So the trees are fire resistant once they are mature, and they become mature after about 500 to 700 years. At which point they can actually start regenerating themselves. And they get this cinnamon color because the first 2 feet on the base of their trunks is their bark. And if you ever felt the bark, it kind of sounds like a muffled pillow. It's more like my pant leg. So if you guys are over in this corner, I definitely urge you to do that, to feel how soft it is, because it's definitely very cushiony. And that's because of a chemical called tannic acid, or tannin. Not to be mistaken with fireproof, but they can withstand very, very hot burning fires. And then to kind of touch on the history of the tree, General Sherman was overlooked for decades and decades and decades. So Hale Tharp, he was the first white man to enter the forest. He didn't notice this tree at all. John Muir explored this whole area of giant forest between 1860 and 1870, and he definitely wrote a lot of books, did a lot of publishing. He made no mention of General Sherman. And then it wasn't until about 1879 when James Wolverton, who actually worked for Hale Tharp, he came here and said, this is probably the biggest thing I've ever seen. So he named it General Sherman after his commanding officer in the American Civil War. And to kind of conflict that story, there was a group of radical socialists who lived down in the foothills, and they were referred to as the Sequoia Colony. And the Sequoia Colony was interested in logging this area. Their requests were denied, but on a side note, it does take about two of these saws welded together, and it takes them about 3 weeks to actually get through a giant sequoia. So, no good. But the Sequoia Colony called General Sherman the Karl Marx tree for about 6 years, So it had these two conflicting names until the federal government finally came in and said, this is General Sherman. And some of you may have been here years past when this area was used extensively for tourism. Now we have this fence around General Sherman, and that's because the most common form of death for giant sequoias is toppling over. So we actually don't have a significant record of a giant sequoia falling over from old age and dying. And that's because of their shallow root systems. They only go about 2 to 5 feet deep. Alright? 275 feet tall, standing in soil that's 2 to 5 feet deep. The deepest is usually about 6 feet. But the roots will extend out about 100 feet, which is what we're trying to have going here with the fence around General Sherman, because up until about 1998, you were able to walk up to the tree and you're standing on its roots. It doesn't really matter for other trees, but for giant sequoias, it's eroding the soil and eroding their root systems very quickly. All right, so finally, I just want to touch on your trip here, and if anyone has any other questions, but I want to leave you with a message. I'll be right there. I just want to leave everyone with a message, and that's, how do you want to leave the park? How do you want your future generations to see it when they come back here? Not 15 years ago, this park was completely different. There were about 300 cabins in the Giant Forest Museum area alone. In that whole area around Round Meadow, that was all for tourism. And we definitely want you here, but our goal for the park is to preserve it for as many future generations as possible. All right? I want to thank you very much. That's about it.